You're listening to a 4x4 Radio Network podcast.
I'm just going to make him one of those little clickboards, folks.
Hey guys, welcome to another exciting issue of On the Trail with Kevin and Scott. That's right.
I thought this was a podcast and a show.
Show number 75.
Yes.
Gonna power right through that. I'm going to do my best to try and say the show number at the beginning of every show. That way you guys don't go halfway through going, what show is this? But that's besides the point. Hello, Patreons again. Thank you again for the lighting system. Moving on from that, well, I will let you all know that I am the parts guy. I do not use proper tools. I barely sometimes will use the torque wrench unless Kevin's standing over me saying, I'm basically just a slapstick parts guy that comes up with a bunch of really inappropriate humor at the wrong time, but this is a family show, so I'll keep that clean. And directly in front of me would be...
I'm Kevin. I'm the engineer. I'm kind of the technical guy on the show. I do read instructions. I do use the right tools, and I actually follow those instructions. And you know, Scott's laying it on a little thick. I've worked with him. He does know how to use a screwdriver. I'll grant him that.
Yeah, and like you say, I'm the best guy to hold the zero end of the tape measure.
This is true. He does that exceedingly well.
Yes. So speaking of which, while we will share what worked for us and well as what didn't, like improperly tightening the terminal on your battery,
yep.
It's really up to you to choose what you want to do to your Jeep. And we beg upon you to do your research, read the instructions, and...
as always, please follow them.
That's right. This is what happens, kids, when you have too much coffee and too much caffeine in the afternoon. All of a sudden, I sound like I am one of the auctioneers.
Yes.
So American.
And we're also sitting here. We apologize if there's any rumbles in the background, but hopefully this thunderstorm that we've been having this month of here has rolled on through. You probably just heard the ding in the background. That was a message from a friend of mine who owns the horse stables I've often mentioned working at and helping him around. And they had a microburst there, and it just blew down one of the small buildings and actually threw pieces across the field, and one of them went right into the new building we built and punched a hole in the roof. So if horses wore underwear, we'd probably need some clean underwear. But they don't, so there's just extra piles to clean up.
Oh, boy. Every time you go over there, you end up just horsing around.
You got it.
But anyways, hopefully it's a quick cleanup. We can get things handled. So...
yeah, you just give me a shovel and I'll get it handled right out of there.
Oh, fertilizer. All right. So on that note, hey, we want to again say thank you for show number 65. And hey, speaking of really cool ideas, we want to say a special shout out to Chris again. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he sent us a message while we were recording about a cooling subject. And so also Scott sent us a great email, no relation to the others, to me, about cooling issues. And we covered about how to keep your feet cold, but we skipped an important part.
Keeping your Jeep cool.
Yeah, and in Florida, that's really kind of important.
It is, and we do continually see Jeeps, letting off a little steam, and not in the good way.
Or to do what I do, flip my hood up when I'm sitting there in my Jeep while idling at work while having a sandwich, and everyone's like, "Why do you have your hood up? Because it runs cooler."
Well, it does. So I think that's going to be a topic that we will chat about on this show just a little bit, is some of the pros, cons, problems, solutions, lessons learned.
Yeah, pretty much. And so if you do... Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No. I just was going to say, what obstacles to avoid in Florida, like some of us learned the hard way.
Yeah. Don't want to muddy those waters. So on that note, though...
I wish it had just been mud.
If you do have a question, comment, concern, you can email us, Facebook message, send us a carrier pigeon. Don't know the address, but hey, we're working on a P.O. Box too. Thank you, Patreons. But on that note, also, if...
email us at
onthetrailpodcast@gmail.com. Or if that's too long, you can try it to OTT, forget it. Just try the other one.
Yeah, or go to Facebook and send us a message.
Yes, that works really well too.
That's probably where we get a lot of the comments from. So,
yes.
So where do you want to go from here, Scott?
Well, let's start from...
You kind of jumped on this one in a hurry.
Well, I got to pee. So basically, Chris, he had basically, again, some health issues. Good to hear things are getting better, Chris. He had a sticking thermostat, and he got it all fixed up. And, boom, put a new thermostat in, put the coolant in, and took care of business, and he's back on the road. Everything's running great. If sometimes you're lucky, it's just a sticking thermostat.
Yeah, unusually rare.
Yeah, unusually rare. And then again, with Florida, and I guess what we talked about a couple times, when you're off-roading, you're not really pulling a lot of air through that grill. Sometimes you have obstructions like mud. Sometimes you have a big old honking winch in front of your grill, so the air can't get flowing. So we talked about hood louvers before, and reducing underhood temperatures. That all those kind of things help. Scott wanted to know about aftermarket radiators. What to look for when purchasing one. Some people have used the Ford Explorer fan, the plastic fan, the 9-blade fan from a Ford Explorer on their 4.0s.
Mm-hmm. Some people have put the electric fans on and melted electrical wiring and caught Jeeps on fire.
And I have to make a little side note about the Ford Explorer plastic fan. Mm-hmm. Being in the parts world, I have sold a lot of those fan blades because they crack. Mm-hmm. Because plastic and the heat... Basically, my ex at the time, her Explorer, I had to replace 2 fan blades in 30,000 miles because they started separating.
Oh, and let me throw a curveball at you. Don't jump at the fact that all plastic fan blades are bad. It's certain types of plastic lose their plasticizers, which seems kind of oxymoron, but it's the chemicals added to the solid plastic to make them flexible.
Yes.
And then when they lose that due to heat, they get brittle. Now, not all plastics do that. It was typically the lighter plastics. If you recall, that fan is typically white in color. Yes. And therefore, it's more plastic. It doesn't have the carbon black fillers. It doesn't have the same, excuse me, folks, constituents in the mix that makes them tougher. It could also be that it was the wrong type of plastic to begin with. It was less expensive. So not all plastic is bad. I mean, there are some plastics in Jeeps, for example, the plastic radiator shrouds in a TJ that have been around for 25 years and are still soft, flexible, pliable. Yep. So just don't diss every plastic fan. But the Ford Explorer one is noted for getting embrittled and going pink.
Speaking of plastic, and one thing to think about, and Kevin and I cough, how I am literally cheap, and I bought I bought a good brand clutch kit.
Yeah.
It came highly recommended by a lot of people, and it had a plastic throwout bearing. I know. And
within a month...
Were you standing in Ron's shop when he sent me the picture of that plastic throwout bearing?
I'm the one that told him to send it to you.
That's what I figured. I knew there was some...
And that's going to be part and parcel. Let's not overdo that, because that's a little bit of what I'm going to do. I've gotten enough feedback on several items from different shops again saying, would you please share this? The last one was really good. So I have, tips from the shops also for this show.
Okay, so hey, that's a nice teaser. So stay tuned, kids. There's going to be some fun learning and going on. But anyways, you talked about service life, because one guy in the reviews I read said that his brother was an engineer. I'm like, okay, cool. This sounds like Kevin all over again. Well, his brother talked to him about how, they engineer with the plastic, so I would go ahead and use it. Well, he's used it, had a problem with it. After seeing the picture, and you bring up that what's called a service life, and so the plastic has a service life, whether it be a radiator fan shroud, or a plastic bearing. You kind of convinced me. Come up off the coin for the extra $30+ and bit the metal one.
It really is, and I'll go into depth on that in that segment a little bit later. So I don't want to steal all the thunder from the tech tips from the garages.
There you go.
So let's chat a little bit about cooling. All right. And I'll start off, folks, talking a little bit about my own cooling woes with my TJ. Nothing really at the time this happened. The engine, power plant, transmission were all pretty stock. Did have a lift, did have an SYE conversion in it to help. But, as far as what you would consider heat generating componentry, there was nothing abnormal. Went down to play at one of our little off-road parks here in Florida. Now, one of the things that is a challenge here, and I think I've mentioned this before, some of the more astute listeners may recall this, but, it's kind of hard to have a mud pit with sand.
Yeah.
You tend to have a sand pit that's full of clear water. And even if you churn it up, it's not real slippery.
No.
It's kind of gritty. So
I keep thinking gritty kitty litter.
Oh God! So in order to create a mud pit trail, at this particular off-road park, they tried to create one with some and brought in clay, which is what you need for mud crossing. And it kind of still drained away. And they figured out what they could add to the sandy mud, the sandy clay mix that they already had in this little trench. And they brought in peat moss.
Yeah.
Lots and lots of peat moss.
Peat moss, isn't that that's Ecuadorian for concrete?
No, but should be. It is a mostly rotted plant material that's been put into a bog. The plants died and the bog got drained and it got really compressed, and it's what I would call very young coal.
If it's Roscoe, would it be a Roscoe Young Coltrane?
Oh, God. Where do you come up with?
Well, Coltrane in the music, Roscoe P. Cole from the...
I get it.
Well,
from Smokey and the Bandit.
No, not Smokey and the Bandit.
That's Roscoe P. The deputy to Jackie Gleason.
Okay, you're right. I'm thinking like Roscoe P. from the Dukes of Hazzard.
Okay. Well, they both were. Anyhow,
moving on.
One of it. I'm probably the wrong one on the movie reference. I'm not a big movie person, but anyhow,
that's the Dodge Charger show.
Yeah, the orange one with the big one on it, the 01.
Exactly.
Okay. But derail.
Yeah, I did.
Pause while they come in. Put the trains back on the track.
Go me.
And anyhow, what we discovered was that when you play in those mud pits, you get this mix of clay, peat moss, which is fibrous, and sand in between your radiator fins,
and water.
And water to make it a nice slurry mass. And then this neat little thing happens is you apply a lot of heat from a hot Jeep engine that's in 4x4 low, blasting through the mud. And not only did I drive it, I let my daughter go play in it, and then I let her friend go play in it who'd never driven a 4x4 because it's a nice big open pit. And the worst you do is get stuck. You couldn't hit anything. And we went to leave, and we drove about 15 minutes up the road and overheat.
Yeah.
Had no water. Added water, thinking I got a leak. Like I don't want to warp the head, Drove a little further, and oh my God, it was fine. And about another 10 minutes, it starts to temperature go up, pull off. Finally, find a nice little convenience store that has a hose outside that'll let me rinse. And I think, okay, I got to have it. Fill it up again. Drive another probably 3-4 miles and overheat, boiling over. And finally, I give up and get a hold of a friend of mine who had a flatbed trailer. This was before I owned mine, who didn't mind getting up, getting in his truck, hitching up the trailer, and driving an hour to come pick up the Jeep and us and drag us back to the house where I put water in it, backed it off the trailer, thanked him, and then started doing forensic research. Long story short, Portland Cement has nothing on peat moss, clay, and sand, plus heat. Because like Scott referenced, it just turns into kind of a brown concrete.
Well, you talked about concrete has sand, aggregate,
and a binding agent. I leave Portland Cement. And so I finally gave up and actually removed the radiator and started washing it, and it wouldn't come clean. And I kept moving up higher pressure. So finally I'm like, well, this is all or nothing. So I get the pressure washer out, and I use the low pressure, high fan weight. It wouldn't touch it. Still wouldn't knock the pieces out. And folks, when I say wouldn't knock the pieces out, 80% of the radiator was blocked with this stuff from the fan sucking it in.
Yeah.
And finally, I'm like, well, I got nothing to lose. So I go to the high pressure fan. I did finally get the caked, hardened material out of the fan core. Problem with is all the fins went with it. So bought a new radiator. That cured my heating problem very quickly. So number one, Jeeps generate a lot of heat. Radiators are relatively fragile. They do plug up if you're not careful. So let's talk about sources of overheating. Obviously, plugged radiators, a big one.
Right.
Another easy one is thermostat failures. If you're not running a safety stat, and I'm not talking about the brand, I'm talking about the type,
right.
Although safety stat took its name from that type of thermostat, and these are ones that are designed that if the system that opens the thermostat fails, it fails to the open position.
Right.
And all they do for that is it has an extra spring and a different chemical. And believe it or not, the active ingredient in a thermostat is wax. wax mixed with ground up copper. And what that does is it has a tremendous coefficient of expansion. So as it gets hot, it swells. And it actually pushes a plunger that pushes the valve open in a normal stat. In a safety stat, they use it the other way. It pulls the valve open when it gets hot. All right.
Okay.
And it has a big spring so that if that wax mixture fails, the spring pulls it open. Okay, they've just kind of inverted the technology. I'm a big fan of those. I run that now in mine, safety type stat, so that it fails open in 99% of the cases, so that if your Jeep just won't warm up, okay, I can live with that for a little while until I go put a new thermostat in.
Yeah.
Other things to look for, and this is probably one of the bigger ones, is collapsing hoses.
Yeah.
I'll ask you, Scott. Well, no, I know you've already done this, so this isn't any good. But a lot of people are running around in TJs with factory-installed radiator hoses.
Right.
Yet the last TJ was off the line in 06. It's now 19.
Yeah.
Okay, folks, that water pump on a inline 6, and pretty much even the V6s in the JKs and TJs, they put a pretty strong pull suction on that lower radiator hose. And once the rubber deteriorates, it doesn't have to leak, but it begins to collapse like a soda straw with your finger over the end. It collapses down and restricts water flow. And you need a lot of water flow through those little front radiator grills that they have in most of the Jeeps. There's not a lot of airflow.
I also remember back in the old days, and I'm showing my age, where a lot of hoses had springs in them.
Correct, and I don't see those anymore. And they were there because the hose technology wasn't there. You know, the Firestones and all the other different manufacturers of hoses. I'm pulling some blanks on it right now, but you know they have changed how they make the hoses. There's a real science to it, and they're multi-layered so that they can stand up to that kind of suction for a while.
Yeah.
And eventually they lose their structural integrity. They're still not leaking.
Yeah. See previous statement about service life.
Yeah, and they collapse. Other things to check. This one's a simple one, and a lot of people miss.
Fan clutch.
Nope.
Oh, what?
Although that's a good one too.
What's that?
Radiator cap.
Oh yeah, we talked. We mentioned that.
The
before.
radiator cap has to hold the rated pressure. You know, usually it's 10 psi. It has a little what's called live rubber gasket when it clamps down. It's also got a spring for the blow-off. It's got a vent lever typically for relieving pressure if it has to. If not, the factory one doesn't have that. It's a quarter turner to vent. But those wear out. And the wear out is a slow creep, so you don't really notice it. You just suddenly realize, well, I've been losing a little bit of coolant out of the overflow bottle. You know, and you go, well, do I have a leak? No, I don't have a leak, but I just keep losing a little bit out of the overflow bottle. It could be the radiator cap is beginning to show its signs, and it's only leaking steam at higher pressure levels. So that's another thing to check. Or to me, it's just like, you know what? That's every year or every 2 years, I just replace it.
Yeah.
They're inexpensive. When you do, look at the filler neck on the radiator. Is it corroded? Is it gunked up?
You can see right down inside the radiator sometimes.
Right, you can. Another source is if your water is very, very hard, okay, and you've used a lot of hard water over the years, when he says you look down in the radiator, you can see the end of the tubes might well be blocked with calcium deposits or corrosion.
Right.
All of those kinds of things develop. Another one that's classic with hard water is the water pumps are aluminum.
Yeah.
In every one of the engines out there since way back when. And if your water is hard, it can cause corrosion of the housing and the blades in the impeller. And I've actually had a person come in and we pulled the water pump off. It was having chronic overheating. And the impeller was worn down to next to nothing. It was just a flat disc, which will actually move some fluid, but not very much.
No.
Putting a new water pump in. And that you can check simply by opening the radiator cap and revving the engine. And if you see the coolant level move, like draw down and come back up, or you see flow in the radiator, your pump's moving pretty well. If you don't see a lot of movement, it might be something worth a diagnostic check.
Yeah.
And again, on a TJ, it's a simple job to swap out a thing. Now, you said another one, fan clutch. I've replaced my fan clutch, and that's one that you go, well, it always spins freely. Well, the key is run your Jeep up to temperature. And then as soon as your temperature gauge is reading about 210-ish, sitting still. And for those of you, if you're having this problem in the winter, you can always put a piece of cardboard in front of the radiator, but watch the temperature closely.
Yes.
As soon as it gets off, shut off the engine. We don't want to do this running, and then run around, open the hood real quick, and then reach in with gloves and see if you can turn the fan.
If you don't have any gloves, what's Kevin's thought on using an oven mitt?
Well, that's fine. Just don't use it for food anymore.
Well, I'm just thinking
that greasy flavor just
make
doesn't
sure you
really
do this, like you said, shut the engine off.
Yes, I don't want to hear anybody. That fan should not be rotating.
Yes.
The key is
there resistance
under the hot system. You should you should be able to turn the fan, but it should put up a pretty good fight for you trying to turn it.
Yeah, if you can free spin it.
Yeah, when it's cool, that you can kind of free spin the thing. And no, it doesn't free spin real loose when it's cold, but you can move it with fairly easily. But when it gets hot, it's supposed to lock up. That coupling that's down in that little fan clutch does go bad. And it's another thing that's relatively easy. It's 4 bolts to take the fan off the end of the pulley, or depending on the model, some are held on by 4 little bolts, and the other ones are actually screwed onto the end of the pulley shaft of the water pump. Those are a little tougher. They make a wrench that you can tap them off with, or you can just get one of these honking big C crescent wrenches like I've got that I use on the suspension geometries adjustments. It opens up, about 4.5 inches.
I have a Widowmaker too that's used to get trailer balls off and on with.
Yeah, same thing. And then you take the blades off the back of the thermostatic switch assembly, the center hub, transfer them onto the new part. So don't be surprised if you order a fan clutch and it comes in a box and it doesn't have blades on it. You're supposed to reuse your blades and then put the whole thing back on and tighten it firmly. I have helped somebody fix a radiator who spun it on by hand and then started the Jeep thinking that starting the engine would tighten it. And then as soon as he turned the engine off, the fan kept spinning and unscrewed itself right into the radiator.
What did we learn?
Read the instructions and follow them.
Well, so pretty much we covered this. Obviously, the radiator would be the last.
Yeah, and radiators for most of the Jeeps aren't that expensive or that hard to change, but I don't start with the radiator because unless it's blocked, leaking, broken, it's probably working more or less okay.
Yeah. If you have a lot of scale lime deposits in there, that's one thing.
Mm-hmm. Radiator flushes,
the radiator's that bad. Just they're cheap enough in that aspect to get rid of it.
The thing is, radiator flushes can also be detrimental to aluminum engine blocks and aluminum heads,
unless you've used them from day one.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? One of the things I would constantly, literally, if you get the coolant that's 50-50 already pre-mixed, if you need to, if there's nothing else available, use distilled water.
Yeah, use distilled water is very good. If your water is extremely hard, I'd say use distilled water. If cheap. You have grit in your water, and this is the barn, it's a well,
coming out of a well,
and it's sandy. Pour the water through a coffee filter. You don't need sand in your cooling system. It will abrade your pumps, chew up the inside of your radiator and that kind of stuff in surprisingly short order because that system's moving a lot of water at a high velocity.
Well, one of the things that... go ahead.
No, I'm just sitting here thinking about other things cooling-wise that I've run into. There are some other related issues to cooling that aren't radiator related to cooling, and that is check your timing. If you can adjust your timing, if your timing is over advanced, the engine will run way hotter. I mean, really seriously hotter. A second one, and this one's kind of a little hidden thing that a lot of people aren't aware of, and that is, do you know that your radiator coolant system isn't your primary heat conduction system in the engine?
You have a secondary, which is your heater core.
Nope.
Oh, no. Well, I
failed that actually test. Moves more heat away than the cooling water?
Airflow underneath the Jeep.
Nope.
Okay, I give
The
up.
oil.
Oh, the oil, yeah.
Your oiling system is in direct contact with those hot parts. The water is actually insulated away from those hot parts, okay, by the jacket. So what you're looking at here is, don't get me wrong, I wouldn't want to run without either. But if you're low on oil, you will have less cooling. Even if you have enough oil to keep lubrication flowing and your pump is reading pressure, you don't have the volume of your other cooling fluid, which is oil. And oil is designed to be sprayed around the engine, to be pumped around the engine. It absorbs tremendous amount of heat. In fact, in some high-performance engines, not necessarily the Jeep, I'm not sure about the later versions, there are actually nozzles in the oil gallery pointed at the bottom of the pistons that spray a continuous stream of oil up into the cavity of the bores to the bottom of the pistons. And then the oil runs back off of it, obviously lubricating wrist pins, but also draining away, taking the direct heat from the bottom of the piston.
Interesting.
And so your oiling system is, there are those that will argue, and I understand where they're coming from, that that's actually the primary cooling system for the engine, with the water jacket being secondary for the high heat areas right around the combustion chambers. And if you think about it, the water only flows around the combustion chambers. It doesn't flow around the cranks and the bearings and the journals and the rocker assemblies. They're all cooled only by
the air
oil.
moving over the oil pan, basically.
Right. So, if you keep having heat issues, you can increase your radiator, but you can also put an oil cooler out there.
Yeah, that's one of the things that Scott asked. He basically wanted to know, how do different types of aftermarket radiators compare to stock? I mean, where do you cross the line from not enough flow to reject heat and so much flow that the coolant doesn't have time to cool off? Well, my whole bet on that is people will say, "Oh, I'll just pull the thermostat."
That actually makes things worse, by the way. Yes, that can increase flow, but your engine may not ever come up to full operating temperature, and your computers will. Most all the computers perform the function of a choke by programming, and they say, okay, if I'm not reading operating temperature, I'm going to add extra fuel.
Yeah, next thing you know, you're washing the oil off your cylinder walls,
which causes all kinds of havoc, and you're also heating your catalytic converter through the roof, and your mileage goes to crap.
But it's only a check engine light. Come on.
Yeah, until the engine sputters and quits, seized up like a brick. So I don't condone pulling the thermostat. That's just me. I think you get the right temperature stat for your engine and what your ECM is programmed for. Ours are programmed at 195, and their operating temperature is 195 to 215. That's where they're happy. And I get people all the time. Oh, my gauge, it normally runs just under the 200. Now it's up to the 210.
It's 100 degrees outside. You're doing 75 on the interstate.
Yeah,
it's going to get hotter.
It's going to get hotter. Is it moving beyond that? No. Well, you notice there's a little red area way over on the right.
Yeah.
If you're not there, you're fine.
Yeah.
The engines are actually more efficient at the higher temperatures. It's just harder on seals and gaskets,
right,
and your feet. Particularly if you're running one of those Jeeps where you've stripped out all the floor insulation. And see other show, we've talked about that.
Well, in my opinion, though, the aftermarket radiators, as cool as they are, I mean, we all see the catalogs, unless you're running a high compression stroked out motor like Ron is, a factory radiator cooling, in my opinion, is going to be enough.
Yeah. Well, and it is because, folks, it's designed to have the air conditioning radiator in front of it and the optional, oil cooling radiator that rarely is seen. But, if you really want to upgrade, you can consider an aluminum one. The problem comes in when people start talking about, I'm going to get a 4-core, or a 3-core. And I think the Jeeps is a 2 or a 3-core. Do you remember, Scott? I think it's a 2-core.
I think it's 2-core.
Studies have found there was a big push in the 80s where more core was better. And it turns out that's not necessarily the case. What happens when you have 4 cores, and that's the number or rows of fins or tubes from the front of the radiator to the back where the engine is. Yeah. And what is happening when you stack up 4 of them, you get the greatest energy, heat transfer on the first one. The second one, the air is a bit warmer, so it's okay. But by the third and the fourth one, you're not actually losing any heat.
Yeah.
Okay. And it was turning out that you were adding a lot of drag to the water going through these multiple tubes and not rejecting any more heat. In fact, in many cases, you were rejecting less heat and you're putting more strain on the pump. So it's pretty much been, the research I've seen says, there are situations for 3-core, but 2-core turns out to be about the happy medium.
The happy medium.
Now, what they have been doing is coming up with multi-pass versions. And that's where the tank is divided and you get the upper half of the radiator might be the first flush, or the upper half would be the first hot water going through, and then it hits the tank on the other side, goes down, and then comes back across. And so you literally have the equivalent of 2 stacked radiators on top of each other, not in front and back of each other. And I'm not sure what the TJ's is. I believe it's not. I think it's just tanks going both. There's a lot of science there. My biggest thing is the plastic tank radiators, like on my TJ. I do have an issue with the seam between the plastic and the body of the core section, as they call it, and eventually that plastic fails and it starts to leak. On the other hand, I've seen brass radiators with brass tanks look as beautiful as can be, and guess what? I've seen them corrode and start to leak at the solder seal.
Yeah.
All aluminum radiators seem to have better vibration resistance with a provision that they are mounted correctly with vibration isolation. All aluminum radiators that are bolted directly to the front sheet metal tend to crack. Right. Because the steel transmits too much. You have to use, and most of the reputable, like Miss Yamamoto and a few of those other ones, send you you'll notice that there's a big slot on the mounting flange, and they send you these hard rubber washers. You're supposed to slide into those slots and then stick the bolt through that with a big washer on it and have it isolated. So cooling in a Jeep. Timing, sufficient oil, clean water, 50-50 mix. Plain water does not cool better than a 50-50 mix.
What about water wetter?
Water wetter is a surfactant. And I actually do use a brand called Redline in the TJ. It helps. Surfactants are basically soaps. You can overuse them, and they actually decrease efficiency if they're overused. Right. But they do tend to increase the physical surface contact between the water and the metal, helping to increase heat flow, particularly if you have an older engine that might have had an issue that got some oil in it, because oil and water don't mix, as we all know, but the oil will plate out on the metal inside the cooling passages. Well, if you have a barrier of oil, even if it's only a micron thick, between the metal and the water, guess what? It doesn't cool real well. No. And water wetters, as they call it, or surfactants, tend to break down that oil. Okay. So does a good flush. And I am not, as much as I don't like oil flushes, cooling flushes can be used judiciously and in accordance with the instructions. The important thing to do when you do a cooling system flush is rinse. Yeah. And after you think you've rinsed it enough, rinse it again. Yeah. You want to get that stuff out of there. There's some better ones that actually come with a neutralizer that after you finish the rinse, you add a neutralizer and run it through there and then rinse that out. Those are probably the only cooling flushes that I would use.
Yeah, the BG stuff we use at work has 2 bottles. Yeah. One's the activant, one's the neutralizer.
Yes, and that's the best thing to do. And so, the water wetters, again, judiciously used in accordance with the manufacturer. People are like, well, it comes in a bottle. I'm going to put the whole bottle. No. Know the capacity. It's easy enough to Google it online. I think the TJ's, 2.7 or 3.7 gallons. You'll correct me if I'm wrong, folks. I know. I'm pulling this out off the top of my head. And you're only supposed to use so many ounces per gallon of wetter. And, I actually measured mine out with an old NyQuil,
NyQuil cup, yeah.
NyQuil cup that's got the ounces on it and went glurp, glurp, thump, glurp, glurp. I was like out there doing mixology for a Jeep.
Nice.
You want one more hit? Yeah. Okay, you're going to get a half kit on this one. And
Well, on the same note of Scott, there's basically one. I'm trying to lump this whole into one thing. You talked about like the air dam underneath the Jeep. You know, we take it out of our Jeeps, we knock the air dam off, and like the airflow underneath the engine, in the engine compartment, and transmission. Like I have a manual transmission. Does the airflow around the transmission help to keep the transmission cool? Does the airflow around the automatic help it keep cool?
Well, first off, let's look at your manual. What does the spec tell you to run in there for gear lube?
I use the factory gear. It's
Basically 90 weight gear lube.
Well, no, it doesn't smell like gear oil. It doesn't have any sulfur in it. It's the NSG 370 gear lube that comes in. It's like $5 a bottle, and I buy 2 bottles and do the flush.
Okay. Well, the key there is that's a heavier, high temperature lubricant.
Okay.
And if everything's working properly, your transmission will never get to the point that it really breaks that down.
So air cooling underneath the engine
is sufficient. Lifted Jeeps have kind of this idea. People look down and they think, "Oh, hey, gosh, I'm lifted. I got all kinds of airflow out the bottom." Well, not exactly true. And I'm not going to necessarily. This isn't necessarily Jeep to Jeep comparison, but vehicular comparisons. Lowered vehicles with air splitters or air dams up front create a negative pressure under the vehicle. Hence, why NASCAR was doing it to the point they were scraping the ground, still are, to create that negative pressure and creates a downward force. Well, there is a big hole in the front of the vehicle. I bet there's a radiator in that hole. But when you have that negative pressure, because the air is being forced around the outside of the vehicle, yes, it helps suck the vehicle down, but it also helps pull air through the radiator and out the bottom of the engine. We lift the Jeep, take the air dams off, put in bumpers with nice sloped bottoms to, be able to come up to a hillside and nose up the hillside and not get hung up. And my Jeep's the same way.
Right.
We're ramming air underneath, creating a positive pressure under the Jeep. If you go fast enough, technically the Jeep might try and fly, probably flip over. But, I don't think you can go that fast in a Jeep.
I'm worried about you.
Well, what? I don't go that fast.
Yet.
Give me time. No.
That's an SR-71 slightly altered.
Yeah, so the key there is that in many cases you've created positive pressure. And I throw back to you that you experienced that in your LJ, and you just don't remember it. Remember before we replaced your floor and your shifter boot?
Oh, yeah.
What did you feel coming up through the bottom of that shifter, that torn shifter boot? It was like a furnace blowing out hot air at you.
Right into my nether regions.
That is the fact that the underside of your Jeep is under positive pressure. All right. So what does that mean for the air coming through the radiator? Okay, it's got to fight through and join with that positive pressure. That's one of the reasons some people in lifted Jeeps have had success with either quarter panel vents on the sides of the front fenders or hood vents. Is it gives another path for the air. The problem is that isn't the design path. That may help the radiator, but that doesn't help with the airflow over the exhaust pipes and the headers and the catalytic converters and all those other things like that. Yeah. I'm not saying that I have an answer for that. A good exhaust wrap will help keep some of the energy in the exhaust system and send it out the tailpipe. But larger
don't
diameter.
Catalytic converters.
No, do not. Please, not unless you enjoy the smell of burning Jeeps.
Yeah.
Yes, catalytic converters work better at high temperatures, but the metal also melts.
Yeah.
So, long story short there, folks, is heat management is just one of those things that we work with on Jeeps. Each issue you come up with of its own unique scenario. I wish I had an answer. I'd probably be rich and not having to use a podcast.
Well, again, so basically, your opinion on the louvers, yes or no? I'm thinking about doing one just because why not? The hood's already beaten up and it looks cool.
Well, I don't think they hurt in most cases. It's another place because you're already lifted. You already have that positive air problem now. The front axle's acting as a secondary dam. So the front bumper's got over the air, pushed it down. It hits the axle. Where's it go? It gets pumped up into the engine compartment from the bottom, kind of. stalling the airflow. Witness the fact that you look at the underside of your hood. I know mine. I have that brown arc from where the stuff has come up and the fan has grabbed it and slathered it across the underside of the hood.
Yeah.
You look at most other low vehicles with air dams, even though they play in the same wet roads we do, the underside of the hoods don't seem to have the same witness marks on them.
Yeah.
So air management, fluid management, basically if you just take care of your engine, make sure that your radiators work, you've got the right oil, the right quantity of oil, your timing is not over advanced, you haven't adjusted the distributor or
your check engine lights off.
Yeah, your check engine lights off. Other crazy things that cause temperatures to go up, a misfire. If you're ignoring a misfire, you're dumping raw gas out into the catalytic converter, which is sitting right there in the engine compartment.
Getting nice and hot.
Getting hot enough to melt platinum.
Yeah.
So all of those things can contribute to cooling woes. Each one of them has its own little specific problem and own specific cure, but at least you're aware of them.
And unfortunately, it's not just a cookie cutter. Here's your one answer for all your cooling. It's like with the death wobble.
I was about to say the same thing.
It could be a number of things that could be a contributing factor.
The only thing we can say with absolute certainty, something's not right.
Well, yeah. Well, overheating is the symptom, not the cause, right?
Correct. Absolutely.
Okay, cool.
All right. Now, I want to take the second here and jump in to, or do you need to do a break?
Yeah, we're going to do a quick little break, and then we'll be right back in for Kevin's Garage. Hey guys, it's Scott here, just taking a quick little break. Hello there, Mr. Patreons again. Hey, just want to let you all know that, and Mrs. Patreons, I want to let you guys know to remember to check out the 4x4 Radio Network and our Patreon page. So just a quick little hi and hello and thank you for everything you all do, including sharing the page and information. We're getting really close to a milestone. I'm really excited to talk about it. But on that note, we're going to tippy tire on into Kevin's Garage and see what we got going on here. Hey, Kevin?
Yep.
Question. Why is the... never mind. I was going to ask why the remote to the garage door is covered in chocolate. Have you been binging again?
Don't ask questions you don't need answers to.
Okay. I'm seeing all these Reese wrappers everywhere. Hi, how are you? Actually, I should have known that better. The man loves his chewy sweet tarts. Moving on from that notion. And what are they doing in the top drawer next to the wrenches?
Hey, where else would you keep them? Keep them down low. Stuff drips on them. Top drawer, they stay clean.
Cannot argue with that logic, sir. So you wanted to tip your tire on in here for a brief flood of knowledge. What you got there for us?
Well, I want to share some
Professor Powell.
Oh God, no. Student Scott.
I'll take that. I've learned so much.
I want to take some time and share some hints from other garages, some friends of mine that
Tales from the shop.
You got it. Tales from the shop works for me, and they're not tales; they're facts. So,
facts from the fabricators.
Okay, whatever works for you.
Okay, I'll shut up now.
Let's start with the first one that you already brought up, Scott, and that is plastic throwout bearings.
Yes.
And folks, let me start off by saying, no, they're not bad. Jeep puts them in the vehicles when they're new. But I'll also say they are engineered for stock vehicles.
Yes, with a cost-cutting initiative.
Well, that too, but they have a service life that goes along with the life of the clutch, and for stock tires, stock lift conditions, stock loading. Catching the word here?
Yeah. I have 35s. It's got a lift. I beat on it like a rented mule.
So it's not stock.
Yeah.
That tends to cause you to use the pedal more often.
Yeah.
The clutch. So its service life is probably shorter than that of the clutch lining because you're pumping it in and out.
Yeah.
Yes, it's self-lubricating, but most plastics that are self-lubricating do it by wear, and
where? Oh, in the transmission.
Yeah, back and forth, pushing the clutch back in and out, in and out, which makes them get, we just talked about it,
Brittle.
hot.
Or hot. Yes, hot.
And what did we say about plastics and heat?
It gets brittle.
It gets brittle.
I was kind of right.
And pretty soon, one of those strokes, you get this, one of the ears takes flight. If you're lucky, it just drops to the bottom of the bell housing. If you're not, it goes winging around in the fingers and gets between the clutch and the pressure plate and makes a general mess of things.
That'll be the way mine goes.
So, for heavy-duty applications, I'm still a personal fan of all-metal throwout bearings.
Right.
And it's just a simple fact of life that they have a better service life under high duress situations. Plastic can work. And the thunder rolls.
That's for a nature break.
Plastic is still serviceable for stock situations and stock usage. But if you're lifted, large tires, geared low, or you just abuse your clutch because you like to bunny shift, at the stoplights, I'm going to recommend that you go ahead and upgrade to the manufacturer that are still making the all-metal throwout bearings.
Right.
It's just, let's just say, more abuse tolerant. Not saying you couldn't break it if you tried, but it's probably going to last a little longer than the plastic
Challenge
housings.
accepted. Yeehaw!
Now, I wish I had a picture, and I wish I was in a situation where I could show everybody the picture. But I was at Red Scorpion Fabworks a couple of weeks ago, and Ron walks over to me, and he shows me something. And I looked at it and said, "What the heck?" He goes, "No, don't blame me. I took this off somebody's Jeep." I said, "Seriously?" He said, "Yeah, this is the 6th one that I have seen." And what he's showing me is a bolt. Okay, a rather long bolt. And those of you who have done brakes on Jeeps would be familiar with this long, thin bolt that holds the caliper on. It's a flange-headed bolt. And the funny thing is there was a washer. And there's not a washer in the stock situation. Even odder than that was the color of said washer. It was copper. Folks, the copper washers, when you buy brake kits and brake line extension kits, are the gaskets for the banjo fittings on the brake lines.
Yes.
They are not the washers under the mounting bolts for the calipers.
So that's the picture you sent me? Or Ron sent me? Oh, my goodness.
And Scott's looking at the picture right now.
I'm bringing it up right now, yeah.
He may well post that on our Facebook page so you guys can see this. Those washers, because it's copper, it's soft and malleable copper. It's designed to conform. There's a bunch of concentric grooves. He just saw the picture. There's a bunch of concentric grooves on the banjo fitting and on the caliper. And copper washer is designed to squish in there and actually flow into those grooves to give you a pressure-tight seal. The problem is if you put it on your caliper mounting bolts and then tighten it, it will tighten, but it will extrude over time and squish, and your brakes will loosen and your caliper mounts will come loose. And if they don't fall off, at the very least, your caliper will cock at an angle and your brakes will drag and chatter and squeal and hammer. And that's exactly what Ron keeps fixing. And it's another one of those where he said, I'm cutting my own financial throat, but he says, because I get paid a lot to go in here and fix these errors. But he said, somebody's going to die doing this because they're going to have a brake jam and flip a Jeep on the highway.
So they need to read the instructions.
You need to read the instructions, folks. The copper washers that come in any of these lift kits or brake adapt kits or whatever are to go on the brake line bolt that goes into the caliper. And he figures that probably this is happening when people are getting new brakes, new rotors, and new calipers to replace, the old ones that drag on the TJs in particular, and on some of the JKs. And they're getting all the parts in a big box pile. And they're like, well, what do I do with these? Oh, look at that. It's the same diameter as the
brake bolt.
The brake bolt that holds the caliper on. Folks, that copper washer is only a gasket. It is not a washer. It's a gasket for the brake lines. Those of you who know that are sitting there going, I can't believe you're telling people this. I can't either, folks.
Well, there's also a sign saying remove baby before folding stroller.
Sad but true.
Yeah.
Sad but true. Now, here's one of the last ones, and this is a Jeep on a modern Jeep, and I didn't realize it. I figured this out years ago, but I also had import cars for a while, and had a little track car that had this kind of brake assembly in the back. But Jeeps are now coming with parking brakes. Some of the models of Jeeps are coming with electric parking brakes, folks. And it doesn't matter if it's a manual cable type or the electrics, but if your rear caliper and you look at the piston when you take to change it off, and the face of the piston is not hollow, but rather is flat and has notches or dimples in it, okay?
You have to use the tool
to crank the parking brake back in. I had a friend that gave me a panic call. Oh, this story gets even better. Actually, his wife was the one that called because he was sitting there going, call a tow truck. They had a modern Jeep with it's basically a screw-based parking brake system, folks. The piston on the rear caliper has two cups in it. There's an inner and an outer cup. The inner cup is mounted to a jack screw, and a jack screw is just a screw that either the motor or a ratchet system in the older cable ones turns that pushes the piston out.
Right.
And it pushes the inner piston, which is tucked inside the outer piston, and the whole thing's inside the brake fluid chamber. And so if you turn that jack screw, you push the cup and the pads close. And then when you release the pedal, it lets the arm go back a quarter turn, which is enough to release the pads. But when you hit the brakes themselves, hydraulic fluid flows between the inner and outer cups and pushes the cup so your brakes are applied again.
Right.
So it gives you a dual way to apply it. The newer vehicles, instead of having a cable, they have an electric motor, like a window crank motor. And I still wonder how that works if you lose battery power when you're driving, how you can use it's no longer an emergency brake. It's strictly listed as a parking brake.
Right.
So you have no emergency function at all unless you have power. But he's trying to push the piston back, and it's not going. He's using the C-clamp, and he gets it, and it bottoms out, and it's still not fitting. And he's like, I don't know, it's something with the parking brake. And he asks his wife, well, go up there and hit the parking brake.
Oh, no.
And all of a sudden, in his hands, and he's like, stop. She says, I'm stopping. It's not stopping. And it screwed the piston completely out of the caliper. Fluid everywhere. And he's like panic struck, and he's like, I'm going to have to call a tow truck to come pick this thing up, and haul it. And I walked over and I was like, what's going on? And fortunately, the boot seal had kept most of the fluid, and the piston in place just distended out horribly, because it's pushed out of the bore. And I'm like, calm down. We can fix this. I said, I'm sorry. Normally I show him things. I said, in this case, I just let me sit down. Yeah. And I was able to kind of sit there, and he goes, you're not even looking at the thing. And I said, no, there's nothing to see. It's all by feel. And I got the piston lined up on the bore. I said, I'm hoping. And I said, okay, now I've got it lined up. Now we have to put a hose on and loosen the bleed screw. So if you guys have ever done this is how it goes back in. You have to loosen the bleed screw,
right,
so that you can push the hydraulic pressure out. As you get it centered, you'll feel it kind of get in the O-ring that is the seal between the cup and the caliper housing itself. It'll start to go down, and then it'll stop. When it stops, while still keeping pressure on it, you have to take your fingers, and hopefully you can turn it. You have to start turning the actual piston in a clockwise direction, and you're threading it onto that shaft.
Right.
And you just keep turning and pushing and turning and pushing and checking. And now once it goes down, and you can feel as you're pushing on it with your thumb, eventually it gets about 1/4 of an inch to a 1/2 inch down, and your fingers are aching, and you're like, then you can take a screwdriver and loosen the boot seal, because that's where most of the drag is fighting you.
Right.
But if you take that off beforehand, you'll let air into the system. And I did, and it plurked out a tablespoon of brake fluid all over the place. Sound effect there, plurk. And then you just then you can turn it, and it turns until you get a little bit of engagement down, and then we didn't have the tool, but I was able to use a pair of water pump pliers. They're slip joint, F-shaped pliers for those that don't know what water pumps are, at their biggest setting, and didn't even have to take pressure. Just lightly grabbed the edge of the piston and just sat there and cranked and cranked and cranked and cranked and cranked some more, and then cranked and cranked and cranked some more, and eventually got the piston down until it stopped spinning. It still wasn't all the way down, and this is what throws a lot of people. This is where they get upset. At that point, I'm lifting the boot up periodically and I'm draining out all the excess fluid, and we finally got all of the fluid out. I tapped the seal down. He goes, but it's still not down. I said, that's because as you're cranking down the parking brake inner piston, even though we had the bleed nipple open to let most of the pressure out, there's enough pressure to start pushing the main piston back out.
Okay.
And so once it was down, then we took a C-clamp and pushed it back in like you do on a normal set of brakes, and it went slowly right back down home. But the key is you got to run it in first, turning that piston face.
Right.
Best if you have the tool, folks. It fits in the slots. Now, this was on a couple-year-old Jeep. It was not a Wrangler, but it was a Jeep, and it was a 3-point slot that you used, not a 4.
So it wouldn't be the typical cube.
Not the typical cube. This one had 3 points, not 4. Trust Jeep to find a way to make you spend money on special tools.
As the Snap-on guy rubbed his hand together, delicious.
Yes. But I found that water pumps carefully on the edge, not grabbing the rubber boot, worked fine, and just kept spinning the assembly down till you couldn't turn it. And it stops pretty abruptly when you hit the end of the thread. Push the piston back, tap the seal back in good and cleaned all the mess up, put the caliper over the pads, put the bolts in, and said, now, before you do anything else, let me close the bleed nipple. And because we actually had a hose and a bottle on it, we actually didn't get any air in the system. We did pump out probably 2 or 3 tablespoons of brake fluid, but it had always been out. And I'd made sure that we were in a bottle situation, that if it pulled back, lock the bleed nipple down. I said, now hit the parking brake. And I said it should reset itself and settle the pads. And sure enough, I said, release it, put it on again, put it up, we're good.
Sweet.
Now put your tire back on. So, folks, if you encounter that situation, that it's not the little crank lever that you've seen for years and years and years on brakes, but it looks like you got an electric motor with an electric cable back to the back of the caliper, or you've got this little arm with a big coil spring on it that kind of looks like you're winding up a clock spring. Those are the gear-driven systems. And use a screw to put the parking brake on. They must be cranked back in when you're changing pads.
Yeah.
And you must crank them in first, then push the piston back its travel length. Excuse me. If you push the piston back and crank it in, as you're cranking in, it's going to be weird because the face won't be, you're like, it's not moving. Yeah, it is. You're pushing as you crank, the inner piston's going in, but the hydraulic force is pushing the face out at the same rate. So that's why I tell folks, just crank it in until it stops and then push it home, and it should go back and look like a normal piston pushed all the way back with the dust boot seal nicely wrinkled up in an accordion format.
Sweet.
So those are some tips from the garage given to us by some of the garages around here that fix your Jeeps when you can't, and trying to share a little wisdom so that maybe you guys won't be visiting them quite as often.
Exactly.
They do hope that saves you enough money, too, to do the big purchases and let them do the regearing, lift kits, and all the other fun mods that some people just don't want to tackle.
Yeah, and support your local businesses, you know what I mean? I mean, it's good to save money, but, support local.
Yeah, works for me.
Cool. Well, Kevin, I don't know about you, but I think I'm almost out of time.
Well, yeah,
I'm
but
tired.
let me slip one more short one in there.
Certainly, go right ahead.
This one really will be short. And this one really is only on the barest fringe of Jeep related.
Okay.
All right. A lot of us, when we Jeep, we also do something else.
Oh, so you want to get this in before you lock things down?
Yeah, I think you caught the drift there.
Yes.
Folks, a lot of Jeepers are RVers.
Yes.
And
some
campers.
Full timers.
Well, yeah, Scott's full timers. But this is something I learned. Scott just moved into a new camper or new RV as part of his life plans.
New fifth wheel.
And we stumbled across one of our bucket lists early. We weren't supposed to do this, but we got ourselves a new RV here over at the other side of Florida. Well, he's joining our side, but
you guys had cookies.
we have cookies. But one of the things we discovered, and I share this with you, if you have a Jeep and this is important to Jeepers because Jeepers usually come with tools. Yeah. And tools like to disappear. They like to grow legs and walk away all on their own unless they're locked down. And we found out that, do you realize that 80% of RVs come with the same lock on all the outside storage compartments? It's a common thing between manufacturers. They all buy something, and it's known as the 751 syndrome. The key number, if you have an RV and you've got little storage compartments.
Yeah, I don't have my key with me right now.
And if you look at that, now this is predominantly the ones that look like the little button cylinders that you see, for opening lockers and things like that. Not the big paddle, what they call slam locks, which are the big dark bronze that the lock is actually embedded in the handle itself. But these are the little button ones that maybe have a finger pull and a turn tab that. If your key says CH751 or 751, it's part of the common typical RV lock. If you have any other equipment, I found out this lock is also found in a lot of toolboxes. Okay, because it's a common lock, a common key. If you're manufacturing hundreds of thousands of items and you don't want to keep track of, okay, this set of keys goes with that RV or that line of toolbox or this. If it's a 751, half of the world has that key also on their key ring.
So I could take my 751 key and open up your stuff.
Correct. And so there are companies out there. Southco is one. IHL, I can only remember. It's International Hardware or something. If you just actually Google CH751, do that, and you'll find more stuff out there as Scott pulls out his phone, and you'll be like, OMG, to use the modern kids phraseology. And there's people that make them, and there are good companies out there that make different grades of locks.
I can buy a 5-pack of 751 keys on Amazon.
Exactly. So this is what I thought I'd share this. It's just a little teaser out there for the alternate lifestyle.
So I even lock your RV.
Yeah, you can. It's one of those things. And once again, it's not just RVs. That toolbox, you got that little silver button lock on your toolbox.
Yeah.
There's a good shot that it's 751. So I'm sitting here, and our Patreons who may see the video will see this bag completely full of 11 locks.
Act now, kids, and toward to the 151th page, we'll get a free bag of locks. Joking, not real.
And they're easy to replace, folks. This is even a Jeeper can fix these. You take a screw off the back, you take the nut off the back, you pull the old lock out, you put a new lock in.
Don't forget the important part.
Oh yeah, and one of the other things is this is RV specific. Is sometimes the doors on your storage compartments are about half an inch thick, and it's a composite, plastic on the outside or aluminum, and aluminum on the inside and foam in the middle. And somebody at the factory kind of was a yutz with the tightening tool, and
they tightened something?
And yeah, they crushed the interior.
They crushed what you can't tighten because they over tightened, and the stuff that needs to be tightened they didn't touch.
So the one company, I wish I had their number. Hang on a second.
Slight pause while Kevin sits there and tries to find the information for the new doodad he has in his hands. So hopefully I can pause enough. There you go. What do you find, Kevin? Did you find it?
Well, it's their. I wish they had their name on the ordering form. That is pretty, guys. I'll have to get back with them. I think it's, if you go to ch751.com, that's their website, these company. And they go through the whole thing. They give you replacing your RV storage locks, but it's anything like that. Anyway, what they also make is an optional washer. And this washer is almost 1.5 inches in diameter with that square rounded corner punch that fits these locks and allows you to go on the back side of your door panel. And it basically takes care of that crushed issue and gives you back a lot of strength so that the lock actually does secure something.
Would it be ILH?
ILH, that's it, ILH. They're the ones I bought my locks through. They offer a regular, standard flat key type, but I actually opted for the upgraded round circle high security locks. They were within $1 or $2 each for the locks.
Dude, you installed lockers on your RV.
Oh, God. Sorry, folks. Scott's been waiting for days probably to use that one.
Actually, 3 hours.
3 hours. So I throw that out as a short little self-help. I realize it's not pure Jeepism, but I know a lot of Jeepers out there have trailers.
90% of the RVs are being pushed by a Jeep. So
Yeah, so that's one of the... That just got to me, yes, pushed by a Jeep.
Said the guy whose RV is color matched to his
Jeep.
Yeah. I'm so jealous because you get to play Eastbound and Down and sit there in your snowball outfit and just do wonk wonk with a horn and just head on out.
Yeah, guys, my RV is powered by an international truck frame with a big old Cummins 6.7. It's not But my Jeep started its life as a Toad, as they call them. TOWED equals TOAD.
Gotcha.
It's a Toad, and it's about ready to go back to being a Toad.
Your receiving name could be Ghost Wraither.
Oh, heavens.
Instead of Ghost Rider. Huh?
There's an inside joke on that one, folks. But just wanted to share that little tidbit with you. But you can also take a look at your toolboxes. And if you're working in the shop and your lock says CH751 and you lock up securely every night, guess what?
Someone behind you is going, hey, my key works.
Yeah, exactly. So you can get their locks from several places, and they have all the sizes. I do like the high security ones because they will tell you this is your code. Not saying somebody else might not get that code, but it's going to be one in the 100,000s that might have that exact same code. And some other neat things about the way the cylinder locks work there. You push in the key and I don't mean like just fit it in the hole to actually actuate it. You push it in and turn. Well, guess what? When your lock has a gasket on it, you got to push in, turn to release the gasket too.
Sweet.
So it actually works really well.
Cool.
So enough just barely teasing on the Jeep side. I can honestly say that we've run well out of time. Sorry about that, folks.
No worries.
As always, it's time for us to lock hubs as opposed to lock locks.
He got me back.
Put our Jeeps in 4-low and hit the trail.
That's right. And thanks for spending time with us. As always, wheel legal.
Tread lightly.
And plus, take nothing but pictures, memories, and your trash when you leave the trail.
So be sure to check in next time for the next podcast of On the Trail with Kevin and Scott.
All right. Bye, Patreons. Bye, listeners.
Bye.
Proceeding has been provided for entertainment only. Proper service and repair procedures are vital to the safe, reliable operation of all motor vehicles, as well as personal safety of those performing those repairs. Standard safety procedures and precaution, including the use of safety goggles and proper tools and equipment, should be followed at all times to eliminate the possibility of personal injury or improper service which could damage the vehicle or compromise its safety.
What he said. Thanks a lot for listening, guys. You guys have a great day.
Bye.
This has been a Vent Axle Media production.